game face. I am Dr. Kim Lannon. I just came in and put my game face on.
Yes, you did.
You like that transition?
Of course. I'm used to it, though.
It's good, right?
Same transition I have.
If I could only teach that skill to everybody.
Yeah.
Right? So Lou just got the, I don't even know, what would you call that entrance that I just made for you?
Swords up. No.
Not with
really,
you.
it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
Swords up with you.
Yeah. No, it's just shedding. How's that?
Oh, I like that.
Shedding.
What was I shedding? I was shedding.
Shedding inexperience, shedding stress, shedding.
Yeah, people always think that, us practitioners, we just, don't have any stress. Yeah. It wasn't even stress about like anybody in my practice. It's.
Oh, how about this one?
Oh, God.
Let's call it processing.
Oh, that was that processing?
Was it? You're the pro.
We
talked through stuff.
You could call it talking through.
Yeah.
I think I made some declarative statements about, here's the thing. Here we go. Because this is actually a lead-in for the show today.
Yep.
Here's the thing. And I have found this, and I don't know if this is, I do know. I think this is not just me. It's not a female issue, even though I'd like to say sometimes it is a female issue, because I feel like I've had the anomaly of a lot of it over my career. When you do a good job, and I know that you and I've discussed this because I know you've had this too, but for some reason as a female, I think I get this more. When you do a really good job in it, essentially, I'm going to be very blunt, essentially showing up those who do not do a good job.
Yep.
It creates a problem and a little bit of a kink in the system of where when you have counterparts to exactly what you do being compared, and literally the word compared, and when you're outshining because say patients like you, students like you, people like you, they perform for you because they are incentivized. Because you do high in tasks, you expect a lot, therefore they perform well because you give them appropriate praise. It's called authoritative being, right? It's like good parenting, it's like good teaching, it's like good people skills, it's good leadership, it's all those things. Well, there's people that don't like that because it narcissistically, there's the theme of the show, it narcissistically injures their damaged little cores more than it already is. And so they have to find a nitpick that, why do people like you? And why do people think that you're so great? And let's compare why people are doing better with you than they do with other people.
Yeah. What are you doing wrong?
When it's not that I'm doing anything wrong. Yeah. So I came in on a little bit of a rant this morning about some of that why compare? It's not my problem that somebody doesn't show for you, but shows for me. It's not my problem that they don't do as well for you as they do for me. It's not, but it becomes my problem. And today the dollar sign on that problem isn't worth it.
Yeah.
And that's what I was saying before the show. It's like, there's really, at the rate of pay I get for that insanity at this juncture in my career and life is like, So
my career has taught me the less money you get from people, the more grief you get from it. It's usually inversely proportionate.
Yeah, I guess so, right?
The people you charge more, you get less grief from. The people you charge less, you get more grief from. Yep.
Yes. So, but this isn't patience. I'm not talking about patience. This is actually a outside thing.
So talk about this shedding. Talk about having this happen to you in the course of a day, and then turning the page and moving on to whatever else you have in front of you.
Well, I'm shedding on top. So it's like you wake up and it's just like, wow, boom, 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 and yeah. So now it's like, okay, now I'm in the next part of my day, and so I came in and I shed it by, as you're saying, shed it by just announcing my things to you so that I could just get it out of the way. And I'll just let it go and chalk it up to what's realistic, rational, and reasonable. And basically the things that we talked about before the show really quickly of let it go, let it go. Because there's nothing I can do about the fact, like I said, there's nothing I can do about the fact that people do well in my care or do well in my class or do well in my personhood. And people don't like that. I can't fix that for you.
We're on to Cincinnati.
And we're on to Cincinnati.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because, So but I will keep you, not the audience, informed about the conversation.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
The conversation about the remainder of this that pans out tomorrow. Can't wait for that.
Did I do a good job just accepting you and recognizing your struggles? And
you did. You
helping
giggled.
you shed?
You giggled, and you were glad that it wasn't about you.
Oh well, yeah.
And you made a lovely, sarcastic, good comment about the scenario right out of the gate, which was helpful because it made me laugh.
Yeah.
You know. So, but how do you move? So really quickly about this is like, how do you move on? Well, I just had to vent. And then usually I don't get a chance to vent. I usually have to sit with it because I'm usually right into like a session or I'm right into something else or I'm right into teaching a class. But on this one, I was like, I was driving and I was getting these, I have hands free. So I'm like getting these emails are coming in and I'm like pushing the button to get the audio on it of the translation. I'm like, getting more annoyed as I'm driving.
Oh,
and
this wasn't a face-to-face meeting?
Oh no. No, we hide behind emails. We could email this to death, but as soon as they're in person, the tune will change. It's going to be like, but it's going to be a backtrack. And this is life. People,
because in conversations,
people will not do this in person.
No, because you get response, you open yourself up to response.
Right. Yeah. And this person that I'm talking about who's doing the comparing because somebody else, some wounded little bird has hurt feelings or two maybe. I'm thinking there's two. They're never going to address it with me in the way that they're doing it on behind a screen in person because they'll be afraid.
Is this group?
What
was this group?
Oh,
or just okay?
No, but it's a protective thing. It's companies, it's systems, it's IO, it's industrial organizational, it's hierarchy, it's stuff. Because I don't just practice in my practice. I have other things, so I'm not going to mention what this is. But it's just stuff that comes up, and after you do something for a couple of decades. Every once in a while you get a blip on the screen and it's such a, if it was something like, whoa, mind blowing, you're like, oh, but it's really narcissistic injuries that are getting like picked at because I do a good job.
The whole we're on the Cincinnati technique.
And people might be listening going, oh, well, that's narcissistic, but no, I do a good job and I'm not getting dinged for doing a good job. I'm just getting like, why are you doing so well?
Yeah, exactly.
Why do people like you? I don't know, because I do a really good job, but it's not being chalked up to that. It's being chalked up to I'm too nice. I'm too easy, which I'm not.
Yeah. Oh no.
And anybody that is in my practice per se would say, you don't go to Dr. Lannon and think you're going to just sail through like a fluffy therapy.
Because expectations are a key part of this whole process.
Because I have expectations just like I do of anything in my life. So whether it's patients or students or friends or family, I have expectations. Mm-hmm. And if you fail on them or you fall short, I am not short on allowing you to know my feeling on that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So we're on the Cincinnati technique.
Yes.
Sometimes for me, I've gotten to the point where I'm pretty good at just flipping a switch.
Yes.
But sometimes you have to do a little release. Sometimes you have to dive into it a little bit, right? And
that's what I just did with you.
Yeah, and it's not linear. It's a situation to situation. Sometimes you just keep walking.
Right.
Sometimes you do a little, do a little shedding.
Right. So I did some walking last night with the start of this. Then it didn't end.
Yeah,
and then it came back, and now I'm shedding because I needed to shed because I'm like, seriously, if I could give context, which I can't, everyone that would be listening would be like, this is ridiculous. And so in my head bubble, I'm doing, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
you have a stake. It's one thing to call it ridiculous, and it's another thing to have a stake in what's going on.
Well, I do have a stake in what's going on to some degree, but I also have a stake in the fact that I can walk away.
It's true.
Which I can on this. Like 10 years ago, I would have been, well, not 10, 15 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, I can't, because you learn wisdom over time, right? Now I'm like, whatever.
I think other opportunities.
I'm like, I
think there's a better scenario for this opportunity.
If this is a bridge to die on, I got better fish to fry.
I think you hit on it though, with whether to shed or whether to just turn the page. If it lingers with you over time, you have to do some work with it.
Right.
If you can just, because often when I'm successful at just dropping it, I drop it right away.
Right. Well, that's what
I don't even get invested in it.
Well, I'm not invested. Well, I'm invested in it right now. I will not be invested after we have this conversation. Yeah. And then the day will pass because I know that the last email that I just exchanged with shut it down for the day. And therefore, tomorrow, when it's face to face, will be the end of it for a few years.
Yeah.
Or it will be the end of it because I'll be like, I'm done.
Depending on
how far this person is willing to take the ridiculousness.
Why are you so good?
Yes. Why?
Stop being good.
Stop being good at your job. Stop doing a good job. And why are everybody else not as good as you? And I'm literally quoting something.
Yeah.
Like, really? I'm like, are you reading what you're writing to me? Like, and anyway. So what it screams is narcissism. And I was coming in to talk today because I've had questions that I've been fielding over the past few months that we talked about. And one of them was, I was going to circle back around to, I think, a show that I had maybe in January or February that people have asked about. And for some reason, not only those questions are there, but narcissism is just rampant.
Yeah,
it really is. And and it's not new and like generational. It's just there. Right.
Is there more of it, or is we just more aware of it?
I think both.
Yeah.
I think that's a both answer. Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was saying to someone yesterday, and I've written some notes down about it, is to start off, like this section of it is you attract people because your energy is authentically rare and healing. Usually if you have narcissists around you. Now I'm not talking about people in my practice. I'm just doing this as a global chat about people, right? Yep. And therapy, not therapy, but therapeutically helpful to people, right? So people attract, and this is one of the questions I get is like, why do I end up with a narcissist? How do I end up with people in my life that do this? And, especially, well, sometimes you're born into families with this, right? Yep. Oftentimes, but right. We tend to attract, we pull for damaged people because our energy, like you, me, is authentically very rare because we're more in the healing mode. We're more in the, like, be in the moment and all those things. Right. And people end up coming back to us over and over after maybe they've stayed away from us or they've hurt us, or even if it's in those moments where they have relationships where, it's, I'm sorry. And then it resets 3 days later, what I mean? But sometimes it's longer, right? But people will come back to you, and because you're that authentic, rare person who's a healer, who's a person who's a listener, who's a person who's empathically there. And
we supply.
And right. And because they want more access to you. They want more access to you. Now, like my patients come to me, they pay me to do a job. So they're accessing it. But they're not accessing it excessively. But we can't do that with our friends and family, which is, and people around us. And some of the scenario that I'm talking about, people will come back and access you because you fill their cup up, which I've talked about in the past is, so that's why you have to really value your time. Most importantly, you value your time and your energy, which is really hard when you have narcissists pulling at you, especially if there's a couple pulling at you, because they, your time and energy are immensely important. And so I think the key here is, and I was telling a client this yesterday, I said to her, stop being the jumper cables to people who have the energy of a dead car battery, because they will literally drain you. We tend to be jumper cables for people who are, I usually call it soul sucking. So the scenario I start with this morning was just a fluke that was like, oh, here's another example of this. It's a soul suck if you let it be. Like I came in, I did my process or my shedding of it, because I have to, because it's a soul suck. If not, I could get into this whole thing. And it really isn't about me. It's like, I'm not sorry I do a good job. I'm not sorry that you feel threatened by the fact that your job is threatened by that, and that it makes your other people look bad. That's not my problem, which is why I was saying, like, inherently, this is like a consistent issue in people's lives. I don't just have this. I see it. I hear it from other people. Like, when you call out people without calling them out by doing a good job, people don't like that, because then it makes them look like they're doing a lesser job, or it makes them have to step up and they don't want to.
Right.
So that's the same thing in like just general life, is when you are healthy, when you're authentic, when you have good energy, when you have high standards and you have good expectations and you don't allow for people to drain your battery, it's hard when you have narcissistic tendencies around you. And I think there's so many more people so narcissism is a misunderstood word. And I'm going to go back to that a little bit, even though there's been shows before on this. Narcissism gets tossed around very flagrantly incorrectly. People, when I ask, what is narcissism? People will say, it means you're full of yourself and you think you're great. When it actually means the opposite.
Exactly.
You act like you're full of yourself. You act like you're great. And really, you're just an injured bird all the time. And you act on that injured bird feeling. The core of you is a little bit damaged or a lot damaged.
Yep.
And depending on the amount of that damage and how you are resilient and cope with it, then that's how it falls out. Now, some people, we all have a little bit of damage. All of us get little injuries. You're never going to amount to something. The comments that you get growing up are, you're fat. I'm just giving you the ones I've ever heard. You're going to be nowhere in life, like things that get said, right?
Yeah.
Who do you think you are? I love that when parents do that. Who do you think you are? Like, that's such a stupid thing to say. Forgive the stupid, but it's such a stupid thing to say to someone. Like, who do you think you are? When you say that to a 5-year-old, the 5-year-old's looking at you like, I'm Johnny and I'm Sally and I'm like, what? But there's a derogatory thing there that gets interpreted and held in the narrative that isn't like, who do you think you are? Let's discuss it. It's more like, that no one ever says you're just like your father and that's a good thing. It's the same kind of thing. So those little things add damages, right? Now it's how you then repair them or how you understand them or how you make a meaning out of them. But when we talk about full-blown narcissistic people who have a lot of underside damage, that they have a lot of emotional trauma or they have physical trauma or they have both or they have sexual trauma. In a case scenario yesterday, I was talking with someone about the child who's 10-ish, 10 and a half, 11, is very protective of one of the parents because the parent is very aggressive and very emotionally damaging. But it's hard to you can prove a bruise, you can prove a twisted arm, but when someone is just gruff and mean and tone based and nasty, the child will protect that person more because they feel like, it's the wounded puppy dog that will keep going back. It's the Stockholm syndrome. I'll go back to the abuser because eventually I think and hope that they'll be nice to me.
Right.
And children are notorious for doing that, which keeps re-injuring them over and over and over again, because the narcissist who's the adult giving them that information isn't going to change. And so they aren't usually narcissists. It's a personality disorder at that point. Personality disorders typically don't move, as we've talked about before. So when you have a full-blown narcissistic person sitting in front of you, they present well in the beginning. That's how you get pulled in by
right,
them.
exactly. Yeah.
This is the start of, they're charming, they're loving, they're over the top, they're kind. And then they find your vulnerabilities, they find your weaknesses, they find where you will have, and it's usually people that are empaths, it's usually people that are authentic, it's usually people that are healers. They will go towards people like me, like you, like, a million other people we've talked about before. They don't go to people that are narcissistic because it's too volatile. And they usually find, when they do find people like that are not as narcissistic and don't have the damages, they do everything they can to make sure that they call you, and it sounds very devious because it is. And people will try to make excuses. Yesterday I had another client say, but my mother's really not doing it on purpose, right? And my answer is yes and no. So it's purposeful in the fact that it's not, I don't think it's actively planned, but it's a habit. It's not something that is thought out anymore because it's so commonplace that it's just a habit. It's just, this is the response to the situation. Whatever the situation is, it's just a response. So when you have someone who has these damages underneath them, they will continually go at you until they break you. And breaking is different for everybody. It's breaking you to tears. It's hurting you to make you doubt yourself. It's making you think they call it crazy making for a reason.
Right.
Narcissist, I didn't say that. Yes, you did. But here's the thing. And goes to the question. One of the questions I got was, when you fight with a narcissist, what is the expectation essentially? Is it to change them? No, you cannot change someone who's narcissistic. You cannot fight with them. So the typical response, this is one of the top ones, is narcissists will say is, that's not what I said. Now, if you have tape, it's great, because yes, it is. But when you don't have tape and you don't have any other thing to fall back on, and you're about to get your battery drained from someone who's already drained, you don't say, yes, you did, and no, and then do the back and forth like you do with anybody else. You say, you cut it off and you go right to facts, so it can't be flipped on you, and then you can't get that Darbo effect, which I've talked about, which is deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender, right? Which I'll go back to. When the person says, I didn't say that, and you say, yes, you did, don't say, yes, you did. Say, I heard what you said, and that's what you said. I heard what you said. And they might say, well, that's not what I said. And you say, I heard what you said.
Yep.
Why do you end it there? And you don't go on and say more? Because they can't fight you then. There can't be more doors open. If there are, it's surprising. That means it's usually another pick point to go at something else at that point. So it's, I heard what you said, but that's not what I said. I heard what you said.
Yeah.
And you leave it at that. I think what happens, at least in my client base and some friends that talk to me about this, is people get caught up in but I need you to, because in healthy, normal people will sit down and listen, have a conversation, and it will resolve out and be like, oh, I get what you mean. I hear what you're saying. I know that hurt you. It won't happen again. And then it doesn't, because apologies that come from these things, from the narcissist, have to have a positive change, a positive outcome that comes from it. And it's 99.9% of the time, if not more, you're not going to get a positive outcome from an apology. Apology is just a gloss over to shut you up.
Yep.
That's all it is. And so, and then a narcissist will tell you, if you call it out and say, that's just to shut me up because you apologize and you don't want to speak about it anymore, that person will then genuinely be like, I'm not saying shut up. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. But in your head, if you fight that out loud and go, yes, you are, you're coming up against the fight of, it's the drain. The jumper cables are in, and they're just zapping the crap out of you.
Then it gets reversed, and it's you're being dramatic. Stop being so dramatic.
And can't you just let it go? And why? I already said I was sorry, but no, your sorry is meaningless because it's repeated so many times. Because when people are in narcissistic friendships or narcissistic relationships, this is so repetitive that it's laughable, because you can predict what's coming next. It's, I'm sorry. No, you're not. Or I'm sorry. Okay. And the person responds with, you say you're sorry, but nothing ever changes. And then you get back from the narcissist, well, nothing I ever say has any merit. Right. It doesn't, because you've said it so many times, I've lost track that now I don't have anything to go on, because your words are empty, which then pisses them off and makes them up their ante to attack you more, at which point they'll say you're attacking them. So now we've got the full-on Darvo. You have confronted it and said, no, stop treating me this way, or stop with this tone, or stop with your words, or whatever it was you did. They feel attacked, even though it's a boundary. Boundary doesn't mean anything but, I am not tolerating this. Boundary doesn't mean rejection. That's their interpretation. Boundary is, I will not tolerate this. Once you set the boundary, it's confrontation. They will attack you. It will reverse. you will become the offender.
Mm-hmm.
You are now the perpetrator against them, and now they are the victim over and over again of, but you were talking poorly to me. So, Lou, you were talking poorly to me, and I called you out on it.
Yep.
And at the end of this conversation, within 30 seconds, you're now looking at me saying it wasn't your tone, it was me that yelled at you.
Yeah.
Because finally I got frustrated and said, no more. And now I'm the problem.
Yep.
Consistently, over and over and over. It's draining. And people will participate in that to the point where it will tap out, and then everything will quiet down most of the time. And then it will take a couple days, reset. We have a honeymoon period. You can read this in any of the pop psych books, right? This is what happens. You go 3-4 days is usually the max. And there are some people that can do silent treatment for weeks on end, though.
Yeah.
And it's and that's neglect. That's another strategy of narcissists. They neglect you by ignoring you. They neglect you by walking away from you while you're in conversation. They neglect you by yelling at you and to try to shut you up because they can't hear what you have to say, because you're not saying anything bad usually, at least in my experience with working with people. It's usually they don't like what's being said because it's hurting that area of the soul that can't be seen, that is really triggering to them. That's all their childhood stuff that never has been worked through and probably won't be worked through. And then we add on aging. The more you age, the harder ingrained narcissism gets in people, and the more they dig in.
The problem when you get to these confrontations is you've committed the cardinal sin with a narcissist. You've peeked behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
You're not accepting the show anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at some of the real problems that they've been trying so desperately to hide with a not a second personality, but a show. They're putting on a show.
And that's the thing. It's a narcissist is doing performance. So for instance, if you call, so example, someone does something nice for someone, right?
Yeah.
That's something nice. But a narcissist will do something nice and then have to make sure you know about that ad nauseum.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you call out that, you don't have to say, like I have clients that you don't have to say that you did something nice. I already know it was nice.
Yeah.
I already thanked you for it. But the person feels compelled to be like, but I spent time and I spent money. It's like, but that's not what this was about. This was about, you were talking to me about something in a poor tone, or you were talking poorly to me about it.
Yeah.
And you now have to show it through saying you did something nice. And now you're all verklempt about the fact that you're not getting kudos for that because you did something out of this that made you feel less than, because you think it should just stand as a great thing, but it was for performance. You did it for the benefit of getting approval from somebody, or getting like a pat on the back, or look what I did, versus most people within the health range of within normal limits, they will not say those things.
No.
They don't. You do something nice for someone, it lands, it never comes up again, other than you got to thank you for it, and that's it. Instead, it has to be like, do you know how much time and effort I put in? Do you know what I did? Do you know how hard it was? It's like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, I have to redirect people all the time on this. We're talking about, that was like such an irrelevant part of this conversation. We're talking about, how are you handling the conversation with the person that you're talking to? Why is it so defensive? Why do you feel the need to perform, to be honored that you did something, when the person you're talking to, or the other people that you've done these things for, they've done nice things for you too, and they're not going around going, hello, look at me.
Yep.
But the problem for the narcissist is that they never have their cup full.
Right.
So they're looking for you to fill their cup all the time, and it's exhausting because you can't do that.
They're searching for supply. Certain types of people provide that supply. They become targets for narcissists. That's why that's the answer to the question, why do I always end up with this personality trait?
Right.
It's because you attract it, not necessarily with anything wrong you're doing.
No.
You just, you provide supply, so you attract people who are in need of supply.
Well, you attract it because you're the empath, or you're the authentic person that believes that initially that charm and everything is real.
Yeah.
And in fact, In some people it is, but in many it's not. And it's hard to discern that. So I have clients always ask me, like, how do I be a better picker? It's, pick your pick, fix your picker.
Right.
It's very difficult to fix your picker because it's not always dependent really on you. It's about having your radar up for signs. And sometimes those signs look normal and healthy, but in fact they're not. So I think some wisdom over time, like in your youth, you just don't see it as much because you just don't have the experience. But people also, as they age, don't see it either because they're so used to that being the norm, that's how they get treated because they've had so many in a row, or so many people, friends, parents, relatives, co-workers, whoever it is. It's just, they come in all shapes, forms, and sizes. And so you just become used to having those people around you.
I think you don't know till you're in a foxhole with somebody. So one of you is facing an adverse situation, or you're having one of these difficult conversations. Right. That's when you start to identify these things. Mm-hmm. The proportion of the response.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think the metaphor of being in the foxhole, and the foxhole is being covered in. I think that's where, I see a lot of that is where the foxhole now is not just, it's a foxhole that's being buried in. Because now you're trapped. I think I talked about this a couple of years ago on a show where I said, you're into this relationship and you're here a year or two in, and all of a sudden you go, oh shit.
Yep.
Now it's all there, but now you've been culled and now you're stuck, and people feel stuck. You're not stuck, but you are in a lot of ways. And people get, you have friends or family members that will be like, you just need to walk away. You just need to leave. Why do you have that person in your life? It's not easy to walk away from that because you're remembering what you had with that friend or relationship.
You become attached to the first personality.
Right. You become attached to what there was that they showed you first, in hopes that will come back, but it doesn't come back. And I can't say that blatantly as a blanket statement. Totally. It will come back if the person who's a narcissist, as I cringe, because it's so rare, recognizes how much damage that they do and that they do, how much collateral that they've had over their lifetime, and that they feel the pain is great enough that they have created for themselves and others, that they will get help, or that they will do the help that is not just surface to say, it's okay, I'll never do that again. I'll never talk to you like that again. I'll never act like. Yeah. And I ask people when they're in that mode, because I do have people that come to see me about this, and I'll say, how are you going to do that? And it's I don't know. And we have to so people who do, I don't know, and never move off, I don't know, are hopeless. Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not just help. They're hopeless. That means that there is no hope. It's not moving, and you have to let go of the hope that they're going to change, because I don't know is a cop-out answer. Yeah. I don't know is, I'm not going to work on it. I'm not going to think about it. It's not worth my time. You're not worth my time to think about it. It's too much work. Like, there's so many things in the head that, right? But I don't know. If I hear I don't know from someone, I will say, I don't know is not an acceptable answer. I don't know, for some people in certain circumstances is different. Yep. But in this particular circumstance, when people say, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And then I start offering up, like, well, we have to make a plan. Here's the kinds of things you do. Here's what you need to do. Here's how to implement it, right? And usually that works because the person wants to, because if they're there. But narcissists usually don't find their way to my office or to a therapy office. And if they do, they narcissistically do to the therapist what they're doing to everybody else. And if a therapist is good, they'll see it and be like, eh. But there's so many therapists out there, God love them, that I know, including some colleagues of mine, that we have conversations that they're like, I can't treat narcissists because I get pulled. They say I get pulled in, whereas I am like, bring them to me, because I'm, because I feel I can help. Because if you get one in the door, if you get someone in the door that has that, they're more likely going to want to work on it because they know that they're hurting, and they're hurting themselves. Yeah. But it's so rare to get someone in the door to do the work. And usually if they come in and it's too hard, they leave.
It's about their priority ladder, isn't it? If the show is the number one priority in their life, nothing's ever going to change. Right. It's at the point where someone becomes more important, or, a child, a relationship, whatever. It's at the point where someone becomes a higher priority than the show, right, that change is possible. But
usually I have to say in narcissists, the priority of someone else being top dog in their life or being the priority is part of the show only in the times that it serves the person.
Yeah.
The narcissistic person will make it look like that other person is priority in an effort to benefit them at times.
Right.
But it's really bullshit.
It's not sincere. It's part of the show.
It's just everything's part of the show.
Yeah.
It's just like they throw money around. It's the same thing. I bought this for you. I did this for you. It was like, yeah. And I could give you a million other examples of what he or she did for you and they did for you. That's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Why are we doing here? Back to the beginning of the show. Why are we comparing apples to trucks? My thing that I do is not the same as your thing. Yeah. That's not my problem. That your truck is not my apple.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's that same thing. And I think that, that drain, so going back to that original quote that I gave at the beginning about like the drain, jumper cables on a dead battery. A narcissist is a dead battery. They are struggling with their own self-worth, their own self-esteem. They are blamers of the world around them. Their life is hard because of you. And if you're out, there will be another you. You are not, but we as people, as human beings who are the attractors of these, we see it, but it's hard to say like, but why can't this be fixed? Why can't this get better? Because it can't. It can't, because you can't. God bless you.
Thank you.
It can't get better because you can't fix it. And that was what I was talking to about this one client yesterday who has a mom who's narcissistic. And I was saying, you cannot fix her issue.
Yep.
She's guilting him and she's doing it was his birthday yesterday. And her whole conversation on the phone was just a guilt-ridden, horrific shit show. And then she followed up after the conversation with a really nasty little text. And I got the whole text. It was in session. I got it read to me. And I'm like, I just looked at him and I'm like, narcissism. I'm like, you cannot change this, and he's trying to wrap his head around like, how do we help fix her? I'm like, first of all, she's 70 something years old. It's not likely going to happen. Not because I don't have hope in people, because anybody can change, but everybody who wants change has to want to change.
It's funny. You just wrapped it around to the We Are in the Cincinnati discussion in a way.
Yes.
And the narcissist in my life gave me one of the best quotes that I carry with me all the time. You can't blame a pig for having a short neck. It's a great quote. And what it comes down to is acceptance, especially in familial relationships with narcissists, that you just adjust, you accept who they are and act accordingly. Don't invest, or limit your investment, limit the pain, limit just drop it. You're on to Cincinnati. You're an adult and you get out of your narcissist mother's house after Thanksgiving, just move on.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing is
it was not fun, but
that's the thing is getting people to do the behavior of the move on of just the actual action is one thing, but then it's getting people to have the emotional connection to that, to match, to feel like, okay,
because it reignites all the old wounds.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like the connection. So that's where we go to the codependency. There's a codependent addiction link in there to the relationship that's unhealthy. And when you realize,
I'm a fixer, I can do this.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that brings you to like, the more you heal as a person who lives with a narcissist or has those family members that are toxic, the more you heal and the more you're like, oh, I cannot do this anymore. The more that you realize, and I'm looking at my notes because I specifically wanted to say this, their gaslighting is your closure. Like when they like you have to flip it in your head. Their gaslighting is your closure because you're closing the door when they're gaslighting you on like, oh, there's more of that close. They're ghosting you, the walk away, the abandonment, the disrespect. That's your closure. Their repeated disrespect of just, how they talk to you or how they dismiss you or how they, whatever, that's your closure. And then this is the big one. Their apology without change behavior is your closure. And then I think one of the most annoying qualities of this is when they play victim and make you the villain. When you know that you have been made the victim in their story. I mean, you've been made the villain in their story. That is your closure. Because even if it's cyclical and it stops for a while and it resets and gets better, you're still the victim. I mean, you're still the villain and they're the victim.
That's the last resort argument.
Yes. It's like I did that in order on purpose, because it's like you get closure. And finally, when you realize you're always going to be their villain, you're always going to be the terrible person, why they're in the state they're in, why things haven't gone well for them, why, it's like, and there's no talking to it. Because it's a waste of time, because every time you go, you're letting the jumper cables get on you. And you're like, oh no, they're attached in. And then what are you doing? You get tears, stress, physical. And that's the other piece of this, that because there's so many pieces of this, people don't realize when you live with people, like you grow up in households like this, or you live in homes where you're married, or it actually physically traumatizes you, where you can see on functional MRIs, brain changes from this. You see trauma like you would see in trauma victims of our run-of-the-mill normal kind of trauma. It's trauma. And it takes a long time, especially under chronic narcissistic attack. It takes a very long time for that to heal once the person's not in your life. And if you're still with the person and trying to adjust and adapt, because many people will stay in those relationships and just adjust and adapt and live sort of together but apart, it's still there. It's a constant, it's heavy, it's draining. And the only thing that can make it better is separation completely and done, or that narcissist has to get help. And that's not likely. And it's sad, because what happens for people is they remember the beginning. The beginning person is not real. And then you have to wrap your head around that person's not real.
And in non-familial relationships with narcissists, this just gets worse over time, because you have a limited amount of backstage passes. Once you've seen backstage too often, they find a supply who hasn't seen backstage, and they're constantly cultivating supply. So they're constantly cultivating your replacement.
And it's interesting, because a lot of times I see this, the cultivation of replacements is really loose. It's not like the same type as the main, or I call it the primary cultivator of that. It's these loose relationships where, narcissists jump relationships. Right? They rarely will stay in a relationship. They'll rarely stay in a friendship. They'll rarely stay in a marriage. If they do, it's usually because the partner is the one that's keeping it together, because they have the better resilience.
But more and more they're seeing behind the curtain, so that's getting more and more strained.
And so the narcissist notoriously is a relationship jumper, so they can reignite a new charm on a new person.
New show.
Yeah. And you'll hear, and I've said this, and I've had other colleagues tell people this, is it kills me when it happens, because you have to tell someone you're not novel anymore. You're not the novelty anymore. You're not the sparkly, shiny object. And therefore,
with people who aren't close to the curtain, these people look really good.
Right. And then that's a big piece of the narcissistic quality, is that you have a person that doesn't look good to you anymore. And then you try to talk to people out in the world about, like, this is what's going on, but they only see the narcissist as this wonderful, giving, loving, performing monkey who looks amazing on the surface, and everybody wants to just hug and love, and he's just so great, or she's just so beautiful and wonderful. You're more than welcome to them. Right? Because you're just like, you have no idea, because it's what's going on behind closed doors. You have no idea. That person is not what they look like.
If you pay close attention in these group settings, though, you find they have a lot of relationships with people who stay at arm's length.
Yes.
Because they see it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And you can accept that person at that level of relationship because everything's good.
Well,
There's no cost.
I know someone that's been, I've known someone that's been fired from 9 therapists for their narcissism, and blatantly has had.
I never heard it turned that way. Fired from a therapist.
They have been fired from a therapist 9 times.
Yeah.
Not 9 different therapists over the course of like less than a decade.
Wow.
It wasn't even 1 year. I think it was a 5-year period.
Yeah.
For not necessarily the topic wasn't that they were narcissistic, even though that was the theme and seed of the commonality. It was that the person just refused to do the work. They were too, once the therapy got to a point, which was only after a few sessions, of there had to be work done. Well, the therapist would say, what are we doing? Like, because the person wants to be friends with the therapist. The person wants to
validation.
wants to pull them in, and the therapist is like, no.
Yeah.
This is a waste of time.
Therapy is done backstage.
Yes.
That's the whole setting for it. And
right.
Narcissists can't deal with that.
Right. Well, because they can't let that guard down, because it's too a full. I mean, if you have,
which is really weird, because that's the safest place in a therapy session. It's the safest place to let somebody backstage.
But not for a narcissist.
Yeah.
Narcissists don't trust anyone.
No, I know. There is no safe space.
There is no safe space. It's all, it's all attack. Everything's an attack on them. That's how it's interpreted in the brain, because they're under fire all the time, because that's how they became narcissistic. They were damaged from being fired upon all the time. So everything is an attack. Every conversation, every question, every request, every comment is you're criticizing, you're attacking, you're mean. It's like it's impossible. But this is how a narcissist interprets their environment. So what they do is they put people at great distance. They have very brief, short interludes, or a lot of people now in the day and age of social media, I have people that are like, oh, I have all these friends on Facebook, and you find out like, they have, 1,000 followers, but they only really know 5.
Right. Yeah.
But even those 5 are like, they haven't seen in 25 years, or they only met once, or like, who are these people?
Well, I mean, TikTok, Reels, Instagram. I mean, that's a great narcissistic platform. Because you can put on a show, right, and really limit backstage access. Exactly. And I think that's such a good way of putting it, is that it's a show with if you get backstage access, this is one VIP section you don't want to be in. Yeah. Like, I wouldn't pay extra for that show. Yeah. But you don't know what you're getting when you walk backstage. Many years ago, I liken this because of the way you metaphor it. Many years ago, I may or may not have had some famous clients that are musicians. And I was invited backstage. Yeah. Yeah. And the backstage, when you say that, I just go right to that one moment. There's several, but there's this one moment where, oh God, it's in these moments I want to be like, this is who it is. And oh my God, you would die if you knew. Yeah. But I won't do that, obviously. But because there's confidentiality there. But the backstage, the differential of what's front of stage versus backstage is just phenomenal. Yeah. And it speaks to the narcissism, because out in front, it's this, I love you all. And right. And what you would expect. Right. But the backstage, mind you, at the time, a lot of drugs and alcohol were involved in this particular band's life, which was not helping the situation as a coping strategy. Which doesn't narrow the guessing down at all. Yes. So I threw that in there to help that out, right? Yeah. Even if I told you it was a very famous 80s, well, they were before that, but they were extremely hot in the 80s and early 90s. But just the backstage show, to the narcissistic point, is the coping strategies that come out to deal with when you're out on front and you get all the accolades and everyone's saying, oh, you're amazing. And the person, the front lead guy is doing his thing, and he's, and then you get backstage and you're like, oh my God, this is horrific. It's all kinds of issues.
Right. Now, mind you, because I know people will do math, they'll be like, you weren't practicing in the 80s or 90s. I didn't say that that's they were famous in the 80s and 90s, and I knew them in the 80s and 90s, and subsequently when I was practicing, that became part of my thing in the 90s.
I have a guess, but I'm not
gonna... Oh, well, you can talk to me about it afterwards, and you can tell me your guess.
But this goes back to your original point of narcissism is considered people who are full of themselves. It's the exact opposite, because the biggest fear in their lives is seeing who they really are, because they have such low self-esteem and such a low self-image.
Right.
And their self-image is probably worse than who they are, but they don't want anyone to see
that. And that's the thing is, and I wish, and that's one of the saddest things is the self-image is so much worse than who they really are. And if they just went with the things that they do as niceties, and they went with the good person that is in there, and didn't get all caught up in the mental narrative that they have of how bad that they've been told they are and what they're not, and all these things.
But it's imposter syndrome.
It's right. And then you end up, if you're in a relationship or friendship, I mean, I certainly have these relationships and friendships around me over the years. You end up being, you pay for the sins of all the past of these people. Like if you're in a friendship, oh, I just had a moment in my head going, oh, but if you're in that, you're paying for the sins of the father essentially, or the mother, or the both throughout your career with them and their relationship with you, because they are so brutal.
Yeah.
There's so much going on for them that is so unhealthy. And I like that, it's their self-esteem is so much worse than it actually is, but they capitalize on it because they feel so bad about themselves, because that's what makes them the victim. They have to put that, they feel compelled almost to put that out in the world, that look how I can't deal with this. I don't know if I'm coming or going. I don't know what my life is, because it's just so confused. Like, it's all smoke and mirrors when they get themselves cornered and then they jump out. Now, if you're in a marriage with someone like that, there's not a lot of places you can go.
Right.
Either person. But if you're in I liken it to a lot of the, no offense to military, but people in the military are notorious for jumping relationship to relationship to relationship. There's a particular branch that has a high level of this, which I won't name.
Oh, more guessing.
I know, right? After show.
Yeah.
But there are, and then also first responder sets of particular, there's a high divorce rate. There's a reason why. There's a high divorce rate in a particular branch of the military, and a high divorce rate that's higher than all the others. And they're very similar because of this exact issue. There's so much narcissistic damage, and there's so much needing to have that novel praise from new, it's usually obviously men, but so new, novel, sparkly women to make them feel good about themselves, and so they just drain and drain and drain, which
don't know the depths of what's going on,
right? And so, but when you first meet, it's like, oh, you're a blah blah blah, you're a you're a spec ops, you're a Navy SEAL, you're a Green Beret, you're a Ranger, you're the captain of the police department. It's like, it's like, yep. Mm-hmm. Not to say that there are plenty that are not like that, but it's a constant, predominant problem in that. And and that has to do with also PTSD and other things that factor into it. But you add in the fact that there's already narcissistic damage there anyway. And then you add in whatever's there. And it's just enough.
It's back to the old axiom, isn't it? You can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it. You can't control all. So, and a narcissist is something that happens to you. And as we've laid out, you have a role in that. You attract them. Certain personality types attract them.
Well, in your role also in that is if you've been an attractor and you pull for that.
Not a fault, by the way, but just a reality,
right? And that's a big difference, because if a narcissist hears that, they'll be like, "Oh, fault! You're accepting fault." No, it's not fault. It's your responsibility in your piece of this is that you allow typically the disrespect to go on longer than it should, because you don't realize it until you're in too far to then realize, oh no, this is really a pattern that's not going to stop. And so your part is that you've allowed the disrespect to continue, and now it's become habit, and now they know that you won't leave.
Yep.
That's how they call you.
You're still a supply.
still a supply.
Yeah.
Tethered. It's the tethering I talked about, tethering in, and so now if you transition this over to talking about like family toxicity.
Yeah, family's different. You have less options. It's seemingly have less options.
It's different, but yeah, it's really similar in the fact that it's the same bird or it's the same beast, right? Because it's the character pieces are the same, but it's harder to break. Marriage and family are the hardest ones to break, because marriage, you're married, and that's just harder because of lots of logistics there. And then family, we still are fighting this misnomer, in my clinical opinion, which you know of, that just because you're family doesn't give you the right to treat me like crap.
Right.
And therefore that doesn't mean that I have to come back and tether to you just because you're my fill in the blank. And you still get that societally of, but it's your brother, it's your mother, it's your sister, it's your uncle. Yeah. And you have to earn that right. You have to earn that right. And there's a reason why, and I have several examples of this in life, is there's a reason why when you get toxicity of people that have really a lot of personality disorder stuff going on, borderline personality often comes with narcissistic personality. When you get that removed from your life and distance from your life, there's a reason why the people that you pushed or they pushed you to be apart, there's a reason why they don't come back around very often, even though they're around, but they don't really come back into your life very often. Why? Because they don't want you to see behind the curtain. And when you're around, it makes them anxious, and it makes you anxious as a person. So then there's all this anxiety in the room because everyone's sitting on anxiety of, are you going to see behind the curtain? And for the other person, it's, I'm going to call you out because I can't stand this. So people stay away from each other because it's so volatile in a very odd way.
That's because one of their favorite techniques is the flying monkeys, and they assume they're going to get flying monkeys in return, but not everybody uses them, right? And family is particularly tough for that because you start to rally family around you. Right. Depending on the ebb and flow of those relationships, you start sending family members after other family members because you did me wrong. Right. It's just creates hassle. And it's so much easier just to, and I tell people this, like, you have a choice. I can't tell you what to do, but you can eliminate someone forever. You can cut them back to just at distance. You can keep them close, but have limited like there's so many variations of it, but you have to protect your energy supply and whatever fits for you. Because a lot of times people get advice from other therapists, not me, to say like, cut off all ties. That's only I do have that in my practice with a couple of people where we've come to the point where it's like, cut off all ties. But I've had 2 situations where cut off all ties brought them back together and they're healthier because the cut was good for them. But that's not always, right? But I never just blatantly just say, cut off all ties. I give like the 6 options. Like, here's what you have. Learn the skills to deal with the issues that you're facing.
Right. And usually the first couple options are already things that the person has tried. It's like, try not engaging the information that they're giving you. Try not to react to it. Try not, try to limit your time, all these things. Like, the very common classic narcissistic parental thing to do to the adult child is, you don't love me, you spend more time with your in-laws. There's a big example. It's like, when you hear, I tell my clients, when you hear that, run. Run as far away from your parent. That's because it's not healthy. Like and I have my client yesterday was saying, like, he engages his parent and tries to rationalize and reason with this. And I'm like, why do you do that? And he's like, it's not getting me anywhere. I'm like, right. You know why? Because you're not filling up their cup when they want you to be like, no, mom, no, it's usually moms. It's not usually dads that say that. It's, I love you. But you could tell this person that they love you is because they just don't want you hanging out with another family. Everything is a threat to their well-being of their own space of how they think they own you.
It's a threat to the show.
It's a threat to the show. And I call it the possessiveness. They possess you.
But a healthy parent would say, I'm glad you have these other people in your life. Enjoy it. Your family's beautiful.
Right. And tell me all about it. Or, oh, you went on vacation with, the in-laws. How was it? And Like, that's healthy.
I'm glad you got that experience.
Right. And not, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to, I think I told you, or in one of my shows a few years ago when I talked about narcissism, about the house that was bought. Remember the whole house situation, and the parent, the daughter bought for the parent and all that. Yep. And it was never enough of like, well, the parent wouldn't come and see the daughter's house because she said, well, I don't have a house, so I'm not going to help you with yours. So the daughter ends up buying and helping buy the house for this parent. And it still was like, I'm not going to help you with yours. You owed me this because I'm your parent.
Yeah.
Like that's, and that's not, it's not like it's common, but it's not uncommon either. I mean, I hear a lot, and it's selective too, because of what I do for a living. I have more people come in and tell me the stories. So you're not going to see like the mainstream, but there's a lot of people that have that kind of relationship. Like, you owe me because you're my child. And it's it's very old school, unhealthy, psychological, emotional, abusive, unhealthy thing of, I gave birth to you, so you owe me to take care of me. And there's a lot of cultural stuff around some of these things too. Like, there's very specific cultures that are very embedded in that. And I can respect that. And I honor that within the context. But then there is also an abuse piece to that, that I honor the culture piece and the people that talk about it from their cultural spaces, because there's multiple cultures that are very collectivistic, and it's all about you get born to essentially turn around and take care of your parents in their aging. But also there's a level of respect that comes with that, not the abuse. And there's a lot of parents who in certain cultures will abuse that because it's their right. And
that's a family dynamic with narcissists, because over a period of time, as you get older, you just wear out all these other relationships. The one that is connected to you, that you think is mandatorily connected to you, is your children, right? So you just tap hook up the jumper cables.
Exactly. And it's jumper cables everywhere, because it's like, you owe me, you owe me, you owe me, you owe me. And if you don't, then it's the guilting, which you only have a choice to feel guilty of. If you don't love me. Yeah. That's my eye roll. Because I remember I told you, my, God rest his soul, my most amazing supervisor I've ever had in my life told me 29 years ago, his very first supervisor, he's probably the best one I ever had. He looked at me and said, if you're in a room with someone and it's your family, your friend, someone you don't know, or a patient, and you feel in your internal bubble like you need to roll your eyes with their stuff that's coming out of your head, it's a personality disorder. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God. So true. Yeah. I can't tell you. And I always pass that on to my classes when I teach, is if you're doing it, same thing. I say, it's a personality disorder. It's your sign that you've got a PD in front of you. Yeah. Don't know which one necessarily, but it's usually one of the clusters of the borderline, histrionic, or narcissistic, because there's different clusters of and that's the one that will eye roll you. Yeah. The one that pushes your buttons and all those things. And people always ask me, like, why do you work with people in that cluster? And I'm like, because I can. Yeah. And you know why I can. I'm not going to say it online, but I'm very experienced in it. And we can just chalk it up to the sport that I was in. Yeah. But my sport has a lot of narcissistic, including the sport I'm in now, running. There's a lot of narcissism in running. But in a very different way than it was in gymnastics. The coaching and because it's kids, so the kids aren't there. They're being cultured and culled. It's the adults that are in that way. It has changed a lot, thank God. And people like me who work with athletes and coaches and stuff are helping change that dynamic in sports. But in general, there's that culture of narcissism living through the athlete, living through, glory days of old, of never having been that person, gets into
the athletic career, the athlete is the show.
Well, and it's the tether, and it's the plug-in. Yeah. Right. It's the show, but the coach is plugged in, or the parent and the coach, or the parent who is the coach is plugged into the payout that they get or don't get from.
It's funny what a different personality the athlete is from you. I remember saying all the time when I was doing all this work, it's like, if I just could install the principles I knew as an athlete into my life, because I had all these things as an athlete. I didn't have them as a person, just so you're just a different person. You're a different personality as an athlete than you are as a person.
Right.
generally speaking.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And oftentimes you're more successful as the athlete than you are as the person. And then that just gets deeper and deeper and deeper as you go.
Exactly.
Because you have to exist more outside the sport than you do.
Right. And that
gets
into the whole identity,
death of self,
and all the pieces, because death of self creates more of a narcissistic turn if you don't have good resiliency around it, because death of self is the ego getting that damage. That is where narcissism sits. It's your reality manager getting hit hard. Like, you're not as good as you thought you were. You couldn't make it. You're a failure. Like, that's all that stuff that comes in it, whether it's self-imposed or externally, environmentally imposed socially.
And these different hierarchy changes that you experience. You're very popular in 8th grade. In middle school, you go to high school, you're a freshman, you're nobody.
Right.
And you have to reestablish yourselves. Then you're popular as a high school person, then you go out in the real world
and you're nobody.
You're
again.
A clerk.
Right. Nobody again.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you're constantly reinventing it. You have to constantly reinvent yourself.
Right. Or you're just entitled because you're a narcissist. You don't feel you have to reinvent yourself because you think that somehow some wonderful thing is going to fall in your lap.
Yep. Because you were the most popular girl in high school.
Right.
Yeah.
Which doesn't work that way. But hey, it's in their minds, it does.
Yeah.
So, all right. So one, I guess my big take, is it my big takeaway? One of my takeaways today is you cannot change a narcissist. You can only change your reaction to them. You can't rationalize with them, reason with them, or be logical, because it doesn't work. And that doesn't mean you don't talk to them. It doesn't mean, that was one of the questions I got, is like, does it mean you don't engage? You can engage, but it's how you engage.
Boundaries.
It's a boundary. And boundary is not shunning and pushing away. Boundary is, I am not going to tolerate you treating me this way. That's a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
People always think boundaries are like, stay away, get away, don't talk to me. No, boundary is, you're just not going to talk to me that way. And I'm going to make sure you don't get to do that, because I'm not going to be around you. I'm going to remove myself from the situation. And you're just going to say, no more.
Can't you always get like Wonder Woman with the bullets? Just put the cuffs up, all the things they're thrown at you, and just deflect them away. You can develop a resiliency that way.
Well, if you're the way you just said that, though, if you're working on deflecting, that means you're engaging them in their bullet throws. So,
no, I was actually talking the exact opposite.
Okay,
not engaging. Yeah.
So okay, so yes, so if it's just the Wonder Woman just coming up and just deflecting completely, and just being like, I'm out. Sure, you can do that, and that it's preserving. It's exhausting still, but it's preserving of you, because you still have to sit with the stuff in your head that you want to say.
Yeah.
And instead of, I'm always of the mind of, at least advocate for yourself with the, I heard what you said.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I heard, and this is what I heard. Like, very specific, not the fight of, you said this. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. Nope. It's, this is what I heard. This is what I heard.
Yep.
And they're going to be like, well, no, you didn't. It is what I heard. Stay with that. Because there's no open door.
Right.
You're trying. So there's the Wonder Woman cuffs. There is no open door. This is what I heard. Period. And in your head, you know exactly what was said. The other one that I can give as a takeaway is, I do not talk about fiction. I only talk in facts.
Yeah.
And narcissists hate that.
Yep.
Because there's no way to come back. It stops them. I only talk in facts, not fiction. Because what you're talking about is fiction.
Yep.
Because narcissists revise history immediately when it's happening. While it's happening, they will revise the history to make you crazy.
Yep.
I only talk in facts, not fiction. So, 2 good things. Right?
Yep.
All right. So, you guys, we're coming into June. Ooh. Can you believe it? Ooh. Yeah. So, but that's because I'm saying it because it's like summery and wonderful. So be careful out there. Enjoy your summer weekends and have fun, and and watch out for your jumper cables getting attached to a dead battery. Because there are a lot of dead batteries out there that you don't need to be attached to. How's that for how them apples, right? And now I feel much better now that I purged myself of my
process.
I shed and processed my insanity of don't do a good job. That might make me look bad.
Stop doing a good job.
Stop doing a good job.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, have a great week.